Well, good morning, Will, and good morning to all those that are tuning in on Facebook Live. As usual, I'll be uploading this lecture also onto our collective YouTube channel. So today's lecture, the 15th in the New World series, is entitled God is a Cosmic Living Organism. So, and I have to admit, I feel very, very nervous right now. Normally, I'm not nervous at all. So, obviously, talking about such an important matter, which is obviously relating to God, is at the crux of my mission. So, so I will attempt my best to give God the due work that his benevolence is entitled to. So, so before I obviously prove or argue for the case that God is a living organism, I first have to define what constitutes life. Now, it is actually very complex, and some would say almost impossible to describe what life is. In fact, there's no agreement amongst the scientific community what constitutes life. Obviously you can all Google the definition. A lot of people have their own interpretation, but the most simplest argument of why it's so complex is that the scientific community cannot even agree whether a virus is a living organism or not. Now, I'm aware that the most of the consensus is that they don't constitute viruses as alive, but that's not the total agreement on it. There's a lot of backing that the viruses is a living organism. I mean, most of the arguments that a virus is not considered alive because it cannot reproduce, that it has to attack the host and replicate from within a host, which is obviously, as you're all aware, is how the coronavirus is attacking humanity right now. But 100% of the scientific community can absolutely state that a bacteria is alive. So, but a bacteria and virus are actually almost identical in terms of the scale, the size. Yes, a virus is for the most part contains RNA molecules, whereas living organisms, all living organisms contain DNA, although that's not quite true. There are viruses that also have DNA. So are they not alive? But let's take the premise that we agree with the scientific consensus that all bacteria constitute the most simplistic of life form. So, and I do agree with that a bacteria is a living organism. It's the most simplistic single cellular organism. I extend the argument of life to an entity that has a conscious state, that can actually do an action based on what I describe as a thought. Okay, now what is a thought? Obviously, we constitute that the human brains has up to 100 billion neurons in our brain, so we consider ourselves as a very thoughtful entity. But then, does a bacteria have a thought? Well, yes. Again, previously I gave an analogy like a computer. When the first computer was invented, well, every computer has trillions of transistors. What is a transistor? It's like your brain. It's a neuron. A transistor is a bit of information. It decides 0 or 1. That's it. So your entire computer, what you're watching on me, what you're watching on your cell phone, is literally just made up of a single 0 and 1. So similarly, a bacteria has a thought process that it can respond to stimuli. So it can respond either to a light. So see a light, you can move towards it and then move away from dark. So it has a thought, but a very, very simple thought, a reactionary thought of 1 or 0. But yet we consider a bacteria the most simplistic of life as a living organism. Okay, I keep re-emphasizing that because that is also points out to how I define God also as a living organism. Okay, now as I mentioned, there's 100 billion neurons in our brains. Our body consists on average about over 30 trillion cells. But if you know a little about biology, you know that every single cell includes a mitochondria. It's basically the power cell that creates energy for us. So without the mitochondria, our cells will not be able to generate energy, and in turn, we will not be able to survive because we need energy to think, we need energy to move, we need energy for everything. But where does the mitochondria come from? Well, it is actually, believe it or not, a bacterial cell. Yeah. In billions of years gone past, somehow a multi-cell was infected by a bacterial cell that was lodged within this multi-cell, and this bacterial cell became sealed within that generated this mitochondria. Therefore, if we all scientists, everyone agree that a bacteria is a living organism, is an individual living organism. Yeah, it may have the most simplistic of conscious state as 0, 1, but it is an individualized living organism. Then by that definition, all 30 trillion of our bodily cell, which contains this bacteria, mitochondria, that we cannot live without. Technically speaking, you could argue we are made up of over 30 trillion living organisms that is a bacteria. Okay, now we don't say, you know, oh, we are 30 trillion living, right? We say, you know, I am one human being, you know, I'm Leon Ying. Okay, so we count ourselves as one living organism. But if you were just base it purely on logic and that argument, then you can argue that no, we are actually a microcosm, a universe itself that contains trillions and trillions of living organisms. Now, there's obviously living organisms, bacteria and whatever, all on our surface, even in our stomach. Our digestive system cannot function without, obviously there's enzymes, but there's also bacteria that work within our body. So we cannot process our food efficiently without its own living organism within our gut. So we are literally a microcosm of living organisms that makes us. So we count ourselves as singularity, but in reality, we are a cosmos of living organism. Okay, and that is obviously the approach that I have to why God I constitute as a cosmic living organism. So we take that argument, which again is all scientific. Our cells contains mitochondria, which is by definition in its own self a DNA part of a bacteria. Then we are, again, I re-emphasize, we are a microcosm of all of vastness of living organism. So obviously you can then argue why, well, isn't the Earth then a living organism? Because yeah, there may be 30 trillion living legacy of bacteria within our bodies, but the Earth has 7.8 billion humans on it and billions more, trillions more of living bacteria, animals, mammals, fish, etc. And yeah, I would, if you take that argument, you would say, now, of course, they would say, well, no, a living organism you constitute, if you want to do it in a biological technical thing, is that it has to have a cellular enclosure within. It's the functionality of the biological function. So here is our skin, which surrounds our body. Within is our bones, our neural system, our lymphatic system, etc. So it's living within our organism. Okay, but there are organisms on our surfaces, on all our surfaces. So within, there's living organism. You could argue on the surface, there's living organism. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Earth is, right? Within Earth, there are living organisms, trillions and trillions and trillions of living organisms. In fact, there are more live organisms within the body of the Earth than actually on the surface of the Earth. So guess what? That's just like the human beings, right? There's more living organism within us. If you constitute every single mitochondria, every single cell as its own living organism, which is how it started. Remember, 3.5 billion years ago, the first living organism was a single cellular, and the single cellular came up and formed multicellular. But the earliest form of life form, these multicellular, were in a cell, these individualized organisms that came together to manifest as a multicellular, and it evolved over time. So again, I'm not just making these terminology, that's what the reality of that multi-organisms are actually made up of individualized living single cellular organism. And our single cellular organism, the legacy of that is our own individual cell, which has its own individual mitochondria, its own individual DNA. Okay, so we consider ourselves as one living entity, but within and without, on the surface, we have literally countless trillions of living organisms. Then by definition, you have to argue that the earth also is in itself a living organism. Yet the rock is like our skin. You know, the core, the hot plasma is like our fluid system. So yeah, if you're going to explain it in a logical fashion to an alien what life is, then they'll say, okay, well, you describe what the earth is, a living organism, you know? So that then leads to what the universe is. So obviously the universe contains us. It may well contain many, many more living consciousness beyond our own planet, you know? So again, so I'm going to share a screen to describe why I have defined God as a living organism. So bear with me. So share. So hopefully you can see this chart, which compares a bacteria with God. Okay, so again, you logically take the argument that these multicellular organisms were they are composed of individualized single organisms, which we are the legacy of. So we are the legacy of all these single cellular bacterial, viral material that congeal together to form this living cellular organism. Sorry, I'm just stalling here because yeah, the charts come up here. Okay, and then we can take that argument that, well, the earth then itself must be a living organism because it has most of its living organism within its body and also on the surface. Well, this is a chart of the most simplistic living organism on the scale of a smallest to the largest. So on the smallest is the bacteria, a single cellular. So I'm comparing it with God now, the cosmos. So the classification is that a single cellular is called prokaryote. So a prokaryote just is a Latin word that just means basically a single cell. So a cell single. Other eukaryotes are multicellular. So we are considered eukaryotes because we are multicellular organism. But remember, again, this is scientific knowledge that all multicellular organisms originated from the congealing, the coalescence of single individual single cell to form a multi-cell organism. Okay, so then the reproduction of all prokaryote single cell bacteria is what's known as binary fission. So basically it clones itself. So whereas most of us eukaryote, most but not all eukaryotes obviously are asexual. So well, not the asexual, they actually reproduce sexually because they have male and female, they exchange genetic material and they gave offspring birth. But these single cellular, like a bacteria, actually they clone themselves. So from a single cell, they form two cell binary fission and split into two. And those that follow my scientific discovery of the twin universe are aware that the twin universe was created at the moment of the Big Bang, created exactly as a binary fission, is that the Big Bang formed two identical universes, a positive universe and negative universes in this binary fission. So again, God reproduced obviously on a cosmic scale, exactly the same as what we define as a single cellular bacteria. Now, the chromosome, as you know, humans have 23 chromosome pairs in our genetic makeup. They're all these genetic pairs and they're in a DNA strand. But these unicellular organisms actually form in a circular. So the bacteria chromosome are in a circular fashion. Now, most bacteria have, the most simplistic ones have thousands of chromosome code. As you see on this chart, the most simplistic of these unicellular organisms is God itself, which but has 180 pairs, base pairs. So in other words, it has 360 chromosomes paired up into 180. So as you know, for all known living organisms has DNA code of 4. In this case, amino acid, A with T, C with G, and RNA, I believe the G or the C is replaced with a U. I can't remember, and I apologize for that. Well, similarly, I stated, and again, I'm not going to go with this because I already covered this in a previous lecture, is that God's DNA code is created by the 4 numeric natural number group, which I created for my new mathematics, n plus, n minus, which is for the real positive and negative numbers, and ni, n minus I, which is the imaginary numbers, okay? And I also proved that the 180 base pair, you can actually calculate and make predictions of the number of quantum states. Now, this number of quantum states that I calculate from this 180 pair matches the number of observable baryonic particles in the universe, okay? So I'm an experimental physicist, okay? I base my proof on, okay, you have a theory, make a prediction, does it match observation? Simple answer is yes, yes, and yes, okay? So the dimensions, obviously a bacteria is extremely small, so it's the smallest of living organism. Well, in this case, for the God or the cosmos, the scale is 10 to the power 27 meters. That's the size of the entire universe that we live in. And similarly for the mass, a bacteria is extremely, extremely light, as you can see there. And the universe has a combined weight of 10 to the power 53 kilogram, which is pretty much the observable mass of the entire universe. And obviously the scale, the bacteria is the smallest scale, and the cosmos, God, is on the larger scale. In terms of complexity, of course, so even though bacteria may have thousands up to 1 million DNA chromosome, whereas God only has 180, it doesn't mean that the number of DNA defines the complexity of an organism, okay? So believe it or not, there are some plants, some algae, some ancient algae that has even more DNA than the number of DNA that we have humans in it, because over time, there's a lot of DNA material that infests into an organism, and the more ancient an organism is, the more it collects DNA material. Most of those DNA don't have any real function. So that's what I mean about us, is that we are actually made up of a lot of our genetic material, actually viruses that contaminated us in the past, and is material to remain within us. So that's what I'm saying. We literally are a living cosmos within ourselves, which is how I'm defining God. God is a living cosmos of consciousness, of living organism within the cellular membrane that is the cosmos. So it is extremely complex cosmos, even though it only has 180 base pair. From that 180 base pair, you can calculate the number of baryonic particles in the universe, and we're all made up of matter particle. Okay, so obviously in intelligence, well, I define it as zero, but zero in the sense that a bacteria can just react, stimulate to a 0 or 1, to a light, approach the light, to dark, go away from the darkness. So it has a 1-0 state, just like your computer. The complexity of our computer is based on a transistor, which goes from a 0 state to a 1 state. So obviously, I gave God an intelligence of infinity, you know, because it does have a finite, obviously, number of baryonic particles. So you can calculate the number of permutations. So like each, the complexity, the processing power of our computer, you can define that as how many processing states there are. And similarly, our brains, we can define how intelligent we are by the finite number of neural cells, which is 100 billion. But since the cosmos, the number of quantum state is literally approaching infinity, or 10 to the power 80, which is almost, in our infallible mind, almost infinity, then by definition, the intelligence or its processing capacity is approaching infinity. Okay? So that is why I have scientifically stated that God is logically, if you take the argument for life itself, God is a cosmic living organism. Okay, so again, I hope I've done God justice in delivering the knowledge and the truth to humanity. Okay, so God bless you all, and I hope to see you tomorrow on the prayers for humanity, and in next week follow-up lecture. Take care.